This is episode 31 with Braam Malherbe.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 31 today, and I'm really excited to be speaking to one of my personal mentors and role models, Braam Malherbe. Now, in case you haven't heard of Braam, he's an extreme adventurer, environmentalist, and a motivational speaker who's dedicated his life to saving the planet, which sounds pretty crazy, but he's well on his way to doing so. However, Braam didn't always have such a strong sense of purpose in his life. After watching his dad's life fall apart, Braam became determined not to let the same happen to him. But after making a lot of money and having it all at a young age, history started repeating itself, and Braam soon found himself broke. He decided to take himself to the mountains with no purpose other than to take his own life. However, after a unique experience on his final night, Braam decided to turn things around and devoted the rest of his life to saving the planet, one extreme adventure at a time. Braam is one of my personal mentors, as I said, and his story is nothing short of inspiring. I was fortunate enough to be his backstage assistant when he delivered his TEDx talk, which I'll link in the show notes. But in this episode, you're going to learn how Braam went from having it all to having nothing at all, the strange thing that stopped him from taking his own life and the lessons he learned from that, how to find your unique skills, talents, and gifts, the difference between goals and a purpose, how to deal with naysayers who tell you it's impossible, and Braam's next big adventure to save the planet. As always, you can catch the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/031. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's go hang out with Braam. Welcome back, everyone, and a huge welcome to someone who's a bit of a personal mentor and role model for me, Braam Malherbe. Braam, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be with you.
Yeah, now, Braam, we obviously connected at TEDx Cape Town when I was kind of like your backstage buddy. And before that, even I obviously knew about the work that you do. But for people who are listening who don't know, why don't you tell us a bit about, who is Braam Malherbe and what it is you're all about?
I think possibly, Brian, to take one back to my earlier years, my youth, when I attended a wilderness leadership school in KwaZulu-Natal in the Umfolozi Game Reserve. That was a life-changing event that sparked a huge passion for me to become a conservationist. But I like to just qualify conservationist. It's not just rhinos, but it's the honeybees, it's the air we breathe, it's the ocean acidification, how, looking after our seas, sustainable fishing, everything, conservation of the biosphere, of our biodiversity. And I will never forget a young ranger by the name of Colin Johnson, and I'm going back, Brian, right the way now to 1974. And he gave us a hard-boiled egg, and he likened it to the planet. He said, look, this was part of your lunch pack, but pretend it's the Earth. And if this egg is the Earth, then what part would constitute the atmosphere that we breathe in and take for granted every day? And us youngsters said, the shell. I think that's what most people would think. But then he peeled it away and he held up that membrane. It's almost see-through, opaque. And he said, this is how fragile the planet is. Now, the challenge came straight after that because he said, what are you going to do when you get home to be an asset to the planet? Because in the natural system, in nature, if you're not an asset, you are a liability. So, an example would be an impala is injured by a leopard and makes a narrow escape. It generally gets a tick infestation because of the blood loss and so on, and it weakens the animal and is taken out of the herd. So the gene pool of the herd stays strong. And we're not exempt, in my view, from that fundamental principle. We need to be assets to this earth. We are meant to be custodians. And most of us, and please excuse the generalization, is one of how much can I take as quickly as possible and stuff the consequences. And we can see that it's pervasive in business. climate change didn't exist in 1974, 75, but it is singularly, and I've studied this for 18 years now, the most pressing issue facing our survival on Earth, bar none. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, it's like nature is kicking back, saying we cannot have one species monopolizing and destroying mega other species. And to qualify that, dependent on the peer-reviewed papers, many scientists are putting the current extinction, as Leakey put it, or we called it the sixth extinction, bigger than the Permian. And anything from between 60 and 110,000 species are currently going extinct on Earth annually. Annually. So my personal goal in life is to try to be the best asset that I can ever be to Earth. And Brian, I think you'll agree, it's not something I'll just suddenly reach. Yeah. But it's to be mindful and to be ethical and to be moral about how we treat nature and the choices we make with our eating and so on and so on. And I guess that's what DOT is about. It's all of us doing one thing. DOT is an acronym. Do one thing.
Yeah, and Braam, I definitely want to get to DOT and more of the environmental stuff later on. But in your TED Talk, which I'll definitely link up, your TEDx Cape Town talk, you spoke about the personal journey that you went through in your younger years and that trip to the mountains. I wonder if you could just share that with us briefly.
With pleasure. I mean, it was a life-changing thing for me in that I was purpose-driven when I came back from that wilderness leadership course. And I ran from Pet to Cape Town to raise money for WESA, the Wildlife and Environmental Society, to save Langebaan Lagoon. And it taught me as a young kid of just turned 17 that success is all good and well, but significance is way above success. And, I felt that I was part of the solution to the planet. And then I guess the wheels fell off in my life. I was in the permanent force military for 3 years, came out and watched my family fall to pieces. My father had a lot of money. He was a publisher. And his business went insolvent, and he then suffered a stroke. My mom divorced him after 29 years. And our family was basically split asunder. I mean, I will never forget, as the eldest of 5, sitting on the sidewalk, waiting for my cousin to come and collect me whilst I was watching these men in these white coats, like chemist coats, taking paintings off the wall that my dad had collected, very expensive South African artist paintings, driving his car away, my mother in tears. And I guess what I want to share here is how I was mollycoddled. I thought, well, this is how the world lived, This was in the apartheid era. And I thought, oh, everyone lives in fancy houses like us with swimming pools. And then the harsh reality of just seeing our family split to pieces and the fear that actually overcame me, because there was no purpose in my life except to make money. And please, I don't say making money is wrong. In fact, we all need money. And the more money we have, I guess it frees us up more for significance. You can't tell a street beggar to be significant when they're looking for a piece of stale bread in a bin. But people that have money and the wherewithal to be assets need to be, I feel, almost obligated morally. So I chased money, and me, Mr. Conservationist, I can say this candidly, I even made money unethically. I was a palumun poacher, I was a crayfish poacher, and I tried to justify what I was doing because it was sustainable, easy to work around that. And then I started an advertising agency, made a considerable amount of money at a young age. But Brian, I guess the big sharing here was that I had this massive ego, but no purpose beyond money. There was no significance. There was no me putting back to the planet at all anymore. In fact, I was just raping and pillaging. And I had this ad agency, fancy cars, fancy suits, biggest parties in Cape Town, 2 properties. And in 1984, my worst fear became my reality. And I too was declared insolvent, bankrupt. And my fiancée left me. And then my dad, who'd lived with me for 2 years because I could afford to look after him, he'd suffered his second stroke. His body was crippled, but his mind was still sharp. But he had no dignity because I had to bathe him every night and take him to the toilet. Now I didn't have a home, so I had to put him in a frail care center, and he literally died a couple of weeks after that. And, from having so-called everything of the material trappings, I had nothing. So from big ego to zero ego. And I took myself up to a very beautiful mountain range called the Cedarburg here in the Western Cape. And I went there for one purpose only, and that was to commit suicide. And what was going to be the last night of my life, I was lying on my back because the next morning I was going to climb up to this beautiful mountain they call the Tafelberg, not the Table Mountain one here. There's another one there. And I was going to just jump off. No notes, no messages to family, no nothing. And something perhaps simple in its beauty happened to me that night in the dark. I was looking at this beautiful canopy of stars that we're so blessed to have in the southern night skies. And I didn't look at it as beautiful, Brian. I looked at it as it made me feel insignificant. Just the vastness of it made me feel worthless and utterly insignificant. And a strange thing you might think happened. A spotted eagle owl hooted in the dark. The males do that double beat, like that. And I wasn't scared of it because I'd hand raised them as chicks and so on, but I felt literally a pressure in my chest like a rock. And I thought I was having a heart attack. Seriously. And I'll never forget, it's funny now, but I'll never forget thinking, sure, I'm dying of a heart attack. I don't have to go nest the mountain up tomorrow. You know, it's funny now. But what was in fact happening was that I was starting to cry. I had not been able to shed a tear since the military days. I couldn't even cry when I buried my father. I planted his ashes in a wild olive tree in his ashes in my garden, which is the most beautiful, majestic big tree today. But I couldn't cry. And nature actually, in my view, brought me back to my senses. And I realized the greatest courage I would ever need to muster in my life was to go home and take on a life of significance. And I've never looked back. I've honestly never looked back. You know, I couldn't do motivational speaking, which is my sort of most of my income comes through international conferences. I go up to Germany tomorrow. And I used to stutter badly. But I realized that I was fortunate and blessed to be able to have a message to share with people, to give people hope, to give people support even, and to give people vision, to have big dreams. And so that's taken me on that career path. But I also, whilst I can't change my past, I sure as heck can change my future. So I became an honorary ranger for South African National Parks. I've assisted with counter-poaching operations, training the rangers. So I, as I say, can't change the past, but I can take that same R1 rifle that we used in the military and use it to good purpose to train poachers to catch, the other way around, to train rangers to catch poachers. Yeah. So for me, that's and starting the volunteer wildfire services for the Table Mountain National Park in 2000. And, you know, whether you or your listeners are religious, spiritual, agnostic, atheist, I just respect, that big word, respect another person's right to believe what they choose. And for me to respect that, and through that, imagine what a world we'd have if we said it's okay to believe in what you choose to believe in. But the reason I share that is there's a biblical term, but there's also in the Quran, and it's also scientific. Even Dawkins speaks about it, that the more you give, the more you get. So when you're starting to genuinely, from your heart, put back in an honest way, for instance, me doing youth development programs for underprivileged youth, seeing future leaders just lightens my life up, you know, raising money through the Great Wall of China run or the Coastline run, and having over 2,000 children smile for the first time through Operation Smile's amazing work. And yeah, I don't get to meet those kids all the time. I see a few of them, but there's nothing more rewarding than what I term the gift of giving.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Braam. And just if someone listening to this is going through quite a rough patch or a difficult time in their life, what would be, I know you mentioned like you always have the power to create the future no matter what's happened in the past, but what would be like your biggest sort of tip or advice for someone who's feeling maybe not suicidal like you were, but who's feeling kind of insignificant and like they're not good enough or that sort of thing?
I think firstly, I would say to any person feeling down, because we all do feel down, we don't have perfect serotonin-driven days that are making us feel good all the time. But except that, I mean, I think it was in Macbeth, it said, time of the hour runneth through the longest day. So this too shall pass. You know, you're not necessarily going to feel down all the time, but I've a lot of, let's call it chronic depression or chronic disillusionment of society as a whole, of what we're doing to the earth, etc., etc. Rhinos being poached hand over fist, and as you know, I'm very involved with saving them. We're raising through the My Planet Rhino Fund over 250,000 Rand a month at the moment, is to find a cause that resonates with your heart. And I always say, have a big dream, not the goals, because the goals are the time frames allocated to reaching the dream. So my biggest dream is I want to be an asset to the planet in every way, shape, and form that I can. And it's so easy, Brian, in that to become disillusioned when you see a dead rhino. You see a calf trying to suckle on the 2-day-old carcass, dead carcass of its mother, and you have to put that calf down because it can't be saved. But then 2 days later, 2 or 3 are saved. So hope is a big word for me. We've got to have hope. And there's that old story: evil prevails when good men do nothing. And every one of us can do something. And to find that calling, that purpose, that thing that resonates in your heart. It might be music. You want to become a musician. It might be an artist. You might be a great mathematician. Every single person, I believe firmly, is blessed with incredible skills and talents and gifts. And it's to find that and harness it, and not necessarily listen to others saying, oh, that's ridiculous, it's impossible. Nothing's impossible. If your dream's big enough, you can achieve it. Amazing definition on the word hell, and forgive me, I forget who said this. Hell is arriving at the end of your life and meeting the person you could have been.
I love that.
It's never too late.
Yeah, thanks, Braam. I really love the how you mentioned hope and finding a vision or a big goal, and also your unique talents and gifts. I often use the example of, like, if you said to someone you want to make movies one day, and someone says to you, well, how are you going to make money from that? Which is inevitably the first thing people say. Guys like Steven Spielberg and those sort of guys, they don't look like they're doing too badly. So I firmly agree with you there. Now, Braam, you did touch on them, but in 2006, I mean, you're not just an environmentalist and a speaker. You're actually quite an endurance athlete, if you will, too. In 2006, you became the first person to run the Great Wall of China, which I think you said is about a marathon a day for 100 days.
Yeah, 98.
Yeah. And then in 2008, you ran the whole coastline of South Africa. Why do you keep finding and doing these extreme adventures?
The same as when I ran from Pet to Cape Town to save Langebaan Lagoon. So for me, the purpose or the calling must be significant. I always say, find a purpose beyond ego, and that'll set you free, because we all have ego. I'm no exception. You're no exception. We all have our egos. But, if you're running these amazing events like like Comrades or Two Oceans, or yesterday the Cape Town Marathon, whatever, it's, whilst they're incredible, and each person, it's a massive feat and a goal to run that marathon, but you are cheered along the way. There's huge amounts of support. You go home to a warm bath, hopefully. The next day you can rest. But if you're in the Gobi Desert and you're running every day like that, you've got to dig really deep, and the ego goes right out of the window when you've lost all your toenails. Trust me. So it's really about saying, what's the cause? So the cause for me was to raise money for the inaugural mission or group of operations for Operation Smile South Africa. And David Greer and I, David ran it with me, we raised enough through the generosity of the South African public for the inaugural mission to take place in Empangeni in 2006, September, where 84 kids got to smile for the first time. And I can say, Brian, emphatically, if it wasn't for those kids, I wouldn't have finished. So whilst I was helping them, they were also helping me get through tough days. There was a big purpose. If you think of a woman about to give birth, she's prepared to sacrifice and go through unbelievable pain for something that is so worthwhile, and that is her child. So for me, it's finding those purposes all the time, over and above, racing to the South Pole, for instance, with Peter van Ketz, the centenary Scott Amundsen race to the South Pole. We did it around climate change. We made a movie around climate change. So again, doing the event, well done, pat on the back, but so what? But what's the purpose beyond it?
Yeah, I love it. You were even told by Prof. Tim Noakes that, running the Great Wall was impossible. So if people are listening to this and they've got people saying to them like that their dreams or goals are impossible, what would you say to those people?
I'd say you take that word impossible, separate it after the second letter, make it into 2 words, and it says I'm possible. I'm possible. The greatest power we have is in our minds. And and I can prove it. I mean, if you think, for instance, Brian, you in your life have had a nightmare or two, really waking up from like terrible nightmares. So indulge me. A lion's chasing you. You're running for your life. Its claws are outstretched. Its pounce is about to land on your back, and you suddenly wake up. Your body is reacting as though it were actually happening. You're perspiring, you're sweating, you're huffing and puffing, and you're out of breath as though you were actually running from that lion. So your mind didn't know the difference from what was real and what was not real. Now that's powerful, because you can put into your head what you choose to believe for long enough will become your reality. And that's very powerful. And, when Professor Tim Noakes, and he was our coach, when we proved him wrong, he said it out loud to SABC camera. And he then very graciously wrote the foreword for my book, The Great Run. And when asked how come we proved him wrong, he now knew that we did it for a charity. He didn't know that at the time he made that statement. And he said, effectively in the foreword, it is not the body that is the determinant in something like this. It is the mind. And he says, and if the mind, and I'm quoting exactly, if the mind can be convinced of the value of the task, there is little that is impossible. And I really believe that.
I love that. Braam, before I move on, something that came into my head, which I wasn't planning on asking, but you mentioned like finding that purpose and those skills to achieve your goals. Do you have some tips on how to go about actually doing so?
Firstly, self-doubt creeps into everyone's mind. Doubting oneself is easy. There's so much negativity around us in the planet, in the media. And then when people say you can't, it's easier to almost go, whatever. I don't mind a life of mediocrity. And that's fine. If a person wants to have a life of mediocrity, that's one's core. But I was asked a weird question by a Cape Town newspaper, and it has a religious connotation, even though it's not a religious paper, and I didn't answer with a religious bias. And they said, did I believe in sin? This was after China. And I said, for me personally, if there is such a thing, it's mediocrity. To live a compromised existence knowing full well that ordinary becomes extraordinary by the word extra, and that is the dream, having the big dream. Having met Neil Armstrong before he passed on after a talk he gave in the States, I was blown away by his answer to a question I asked him. I said, Mr. Armstrong, when did you first dream of landing on the moon? And it really did blow me away. He said, when I was a 15-year-old schoolboy. And powerfully, his father was a great influencer in his life, and they were lying on the lawn looking at the full moon. And he looked at the moon, and he said to his dad, can we walk on there one day? And notice the answer, not maybe, possibly. He said, would you like to? So he made it personal. You see, there's the power of the dream. Then the goals. He became a fighter pilot for the US Air Force. He became the first test pilot to see the Earth out of the blueness of our atmosphere. And only then one giant leap for mankind. But he had that dream when he was 15. Roger Bannister, sub-400 mile. Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary. Sisal ropes, leather boots, no oxygen. What seems impossible today is possible tomorrow. Now, if you remember Star Trek, the guys were talking on like Samsung lookalike mobile phones, and Spock would play on his iPad. We used to think that's bizarre. Now everyone's got one.
Yeah, and like cars that drive themselves is just around the corner.
Exactly.
Braam, so we touched on some of your past adventures, and obviously China and running the coastline and the Antarctic. But what is the sort of the next adventure I know you're gearing up for? And tell us a bit about that, and then about DOT as well.
It's a mega adventure. Peter van Ketz, my good mate, that went to the South Pole with me. We took delivery of our boat about a month ago. It's up here at my home. It's 6'8". It's a rowing boat. And Pete and I, the Cape to Rio yacht race, which takes place every 3 years, is known as one of the toughest yacht races in the world. And we're rowing it. So that's on the 1st of January this coming year. So Pete will row for 2 hours, and I'll sleep in the little hatch for 2 hours, and we swap over. And we rowed 2 hours on, 2 hours off for close on 3 months, 6,700 kilometers.
And now that's part of a bigger adventure, right?
Well, we're calling it the DOT Rio Row, Cape to Rio Row, the DOT Cape to Rio Row. We've got the full support of the race organizers. They're putting our boat at the boat show right outside the aquarium. So anyone would like to come and have a look, you'll see it there. It's called Mondoro, named after our sponsors, the name of his game launch in Welgevonden Game Reserve. And Mondoro means lion spirit, which I think is kind of appropriate for what we're going to be doing. But then again, to come back to the most important part, and that's the purpose. So we are currently signing agreements with our app developers, the Dot app, the Do One Thing app. And we had meetings in Cape Town last week. I saw them in Joburg again last week as well. And they're taking a third share, which is a fantastic thing. So in lieu of probably 1.5 million rands, they want a share because they see that this thing can change the world. And what it is, Brian, is it's almost like, to coin the phrase, it's like Facebook for the planet. Mm-hmm. So there are 4 categories in the app, and those are the most pressing issues facing our survival. And in no particular order: conservation, as I've already mentioned, of all the planet's biodiversity; waste, we're the only species that doesn't recycle; energy, that's what's happened since the Industrial Revolution, CO2 emissions and climate change; and obviously water, both seawater and fresh water. We know already the state of the farms in the Free State, and how food prices are soaring, increases in tsunamis and earthquakes. So it almost seems overwhelming when I speak like that. But DOT is not about big change. It's about many people doing many small things. So we're basically saying, we rode to Rio. The South Atlantic has not been rowed before. We will do it because we can have the support of millions. We're basically saying we all pull together to reach Rio towards a sustainable future. So we're hoping to get about 5 million people on the app by the time we reach Rio, sort of late into March next year. And people are going to be able to follow us real time. We can have every day sending satellite links, a camera, 360 camera on the boat, so you can get notification on your phone, and you'll see Pete rowing, and you'll say, look over my left shoulder, and you literally turn your phone and you'll see the whale in the water.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So people can follow us and they can track us real time. And we're saying we want people to match doing dots. So let me give just a few from a very simple dot. Put a brick in your toilet system. Every time you flush, you save a liter of water. That's a dot. Shower, don't bath. Put a bucket in the shower. Use that for grey water. Don't pull the toilet lever every time you have a pee. Mm-hmm. I'm not just talking water ones. When you shave, switch the tap off. When you're brushing your teeth, switch the tap off. So under each of these categories, we've already got 25 at least of what people can do. And then they can do their own and they can post it. Geolocation in terms of your city, Cape Town, South Africa. And it's not about Brian or Braam doing millions of dots. It's about how many people can you influence to do your dot. Mm. So if you've got to follow a big social media network, challenge people. You're either an asset or a liability. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Many simple choices, and I reckon that can create a tipping point for the earth.
Yeah, I love that. And people can obviously share and comment and like your dots.
Absolutely.
I love that, Braam. 2 things. So when will that app be available?
We're aiming at 1 November, and there will be an activation process that goes through the media. And the other great news that I've got is Media24 have just come in as our media sponsors, putting 3.4 million rands worth of media. So there are going to be huge amounts of media around it. Very exciting. Very exciting. So 1 November is phase 1 of the app.
And the other thing I wanted to ask was, where can people go to track your progress on the row?
There'll be a website. There'll be a dot website that's currently being built and be linked to the app. It looks like we're going to be getting 30,000 dot bracelets through the Relate group. They do the rhinos and the wild people that in the woolies. They'll be out. So if anyone's wearing that qualifies you. You've already done a dot, because $8.50 goes to the Dot Foundation, which goes to assisting best practices in those various categories, whether it's rhino conservation or whatever. There will also be a QR code on there, so you can download the app from that, and in any of the app stores.
I love it. Yeah, I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. If it's not live by the time this goes out, then I can always add it in later. But I'm really excited about Dot, the app, and for your adventure. Braam, I do want to be mindful of the time, but before I get to the end, I just want to ask some sort of quick fire questions at the end here. The first of which is, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s?
That's a very interesting one. What do I wish I'd been told in my 20s? Don't doubt yourself.
Cool. What is the greatest opportunity for 20-somethings today?
You are the future. You're the future. I mean, I talk to schools. I'm talking to St. David's College in Joburg in about a week. It's exciting times. Now, that's either good or bad, because the decisions we make, the 20-somethings, are the future. I mean, from the younger kids in high school still, but going into your 20s, you become an influencer, and you should be an influencer, because the decisions we take on the decisions we make today regarding the future of our planet, that will be decided in the next 5 to 10 years, max 5 to 10 years.
All right. What is the most important thing that 20-somethings need to hear in this interview?
It's never too late. It's never too late to shift things. It's never too late to be an influencer. It's never too late to actually have a dream, develop that dream, and then basically dream big, plan well, minimize risks.
I love it. Braam, I've got one more question, but before I get to that, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out more about all the work that you do?
I think the easiest, Brian, is on my website, which is just www.braammalherbe.com. www.braammalherbe.com, or also Facebook page. The public page is Braam Malherbe Extreme Conservationist. And the reason people say that is because I say, well, extreme times call for extreme measures.
I love it, Braam. I'll link up to all of that in the show notes, which will be at briantier.com/031. Before I get to the final question, Braam, I just want to acknowledge you for coming on today and for all the amazing work that you're doing. Despite having sort of rocky times in your younger years, realizing that you had the power to create something positive going forward, and you've really dedicated yourself to a purpose, probably more than anyone I know. And you're a constant role model and mentor for me. So thank you so much for that. The final question that I have is, what one thing, in the spirit of DOT, one thing can listeners do this week to start their own quarter life comeback?
Brilliant question. And I want to say it's my birthday tomorrow.
Hey.
So what I'd love is on my birthday to have people wishing me through an action. Because love is a doing word. And how they do that is, if they either have not yet got a My School, My Village, My Planet card, which you pick up for free in any Woolly store, they go and get one, and they nominate the My Planet Rhino Fund as their beneficiary. And it's easy, it takes 1 minute. Mm-hmm. Every time you shop, it doesn't cost you a cent. Woolies, Engine, Quick Shops, there's a number of merchants on there that actually pay money as a percentage of whatever you spend. Hence the 250,000 we're raising for rhinos. And if any of your listeners have already got it, I challenge them to get one of their mates to get one too. Many small amounts will make a huge difference to saving this iconic species.
Exactly. And you're going to be on an airplane to Germany on your birthday.
No, sorry, next day. 20th, right. Okay. 21st, I'm going to Germany.
Oh, you get to celebrate then.
Yeah, a little bit.
Braam, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure getting to speak to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing how DOT progresses.
You're super welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up this week's episode 31 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a huge thanks to Braam Malherbe once again for coming on and sharing his inspiring story. If you like this episode, make sure you share it around on social media with your friends, and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier to let me know what some of your biggest takeaways were. For me, it's got to be the fact that while we can't change the past and what's happened before, we sure as hell can change our future and what we do from this day forward. That, coupled with the fact that each one of us has unique skills and talents, and we can all do something to make a positive difference in the world. Those are my biggest takeaways from this episode. And if you like this and want to catch more episodes like it, make sure you subscribe at quarterlifecomeback.com so you get all the episodes as soon as they go live. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/031. But until next week, thanks for spending time with me again, and keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.